Hello, everyone. My name is Ahad Ahmed, and I'd like to take this time to talk about the book Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is going to be a personal and critical reflection. I'm going to summarize what Mr. Coates writes in Between the World and Me, and I'll also try to engage with it critically, connecting it with messages of diversity, uh, equity and inclusion, and looking at some of the fundamental ideas that Mr. Coates puts forward, while also attempting to relate what his experience is, relate that with my own life. And so let's get started. And so Mr. Coates starts off um, with a essentially telling his son that uh, this whole book essentially is a letter to his son. And he starts off mentioning his own history, his own youth, and how he grew up in the streets of Baltimore, feeling afraid for his life. There really wasn't any source of safety or satisfaction for Mr. Coates. When it came to the streets, there was constant danger to the African American population, which Mr. Coates belongs to in Baltimore, as well as many places around the United States at that time till today. They are afraid of the police and the brutality that they face from the police. And so they go out of their way to project strength that they actually do have power and influence, and they tend to try to make up for the actual loss of power. They don't actually have power and choice over their own body and safety. And so Mr. Coates describes his experience, and then he moves on to describing enlightenment of sorts that he got at Howard University, as opposed to his public school education, which he pretty much describes as useless, something that was divorced from reality. He mentions that he looked up to Malcolm X, and he admired some of Malcolm X's ideas about being unapologetically black, being prideful in black and black history, and saying and standing up for justice, even if it insults people, even if it hurts their feelings, because that is the experience of the African American people, and to word it any other way would be an injustice. This also relates to one of our readings in this course, in which the reading by Kozel, it argued that American society, even though American society and American education specifically, even though there seems to be equality there on the surface, everyone has seems to have a fair shot at education, but still, because of the segregated nature of these schools, there remains severe inequity. So I'd like to now focus on some key intersecting themes between Tahisi Coates' book and our readings in the course. And so first, Tahisi Coates, he notes that just having a black president and having had black congressmen and people of influence in these high and influential spaces, just having those people there, having diversity, does not mean that the systemic barriers have been removed for everyone else. Rather, those systemic barriers continue to exist and perpetuate inequality. And so this has been echoed somewhat by Eisner. Eisner, he presents this thought, he moves this thought forward that to have true equality in schools doesn't mean to simply acknowledge and put these people in places of power. Rather, we have to look at the curriculum, the student experience, the hidden curriculum, assessment, and for there to be true equality, we need to design educational experiences in line with the marginalized population's experience. And Oakes, uh, he's addressed equity and the issue regarding the systemic barriers faced by the marginalized people, different marginalized people, and how these systemic barriers prevent real access to success and security. Oak's article was, or chapter was about tracking and how tracking students from a young age and making these types of profiles and having these low expectations for them, how that sets them up for a life of unfortunately poverty and lower educational outcomes. And lastly, the exclusion that this creates. This has been described by Ahram and Fergus. The exclusion that these marginalized people they face, this leads to inequity in life, and it perpetuates cycles of disadvantage. So with that said, there's a lot of takeaways from this book and the course readings, a lot of things that I can relate to personally. I am an immigrant, and I moved to the United States at a very, very young age. And initially, we were in a neighborhood that I felt was quite unsafe. The police, you could hear police sirens quite often, see the police quite often in the area, the flashing lights, and it was all quite intimidating. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of trust in the police. I always felt that uh, whenever I looked at police, I always felt unsafe rather than safe. And this echoes Ta-Nehisi Coates' sentiment about Prince Jones's murder as well. It was horrifying to read that. It was nobody should suffer at the hands of those people that are there to protect us. Also, growing up, I faced social inclusion. Obviously, I am different from the majority of the population uh, of the United States. There were a lot of social events that my colleagues would go to. Uh, there would be um, there would be different types of groups and faith gatherings and all of these things that add up in the sense that it lowered my, now that I reflect about it, it lowered my social capital while simultaneously it increased their social capital, unlocking many gains for them and many advantages for them. And because I did not have that same type of social status, I couldn't relate to that type of background. It led to me growing up without those advantages. So it's worth talking about these systemic barriers in education and society and really identifying them and talking about them so that we're clear what I mean by these systemic barriers and how we could go about removing them. So the first thing is, according to our reading, schools track marginalized students. They track marginalized students into lower tier education. This limits their future success. Number two, Black students face harsher punishment and harsher discipline. This leads to exclusion, time away from class, and essentially creates a pipeline of sorts directly from the school system into prisons. Number three, there is the curriculum you could call is the null. You could call the curriculum the null curriculum. This means that critical race discussions are completely ignored in schools. This is something that we don't talk about. This is a problem that prevents us from moving forward in racial equality. And lastly, This is something that has been identified by Ta-Nehisi Coates himself. Education prepares Black students for compliance. The current educational landscape, if you look at the curriculum, essentially it prepares people to be employees, to be workers, not to be critical thinkers, people that stand up for social justice, people that, and it doesn't give, it's not giving the black population the tools it needs to reduce and eliminate these inequalities. So to move this discussion along, we have to ask ourselves questions, constantly be curious about the way forward. And these are some of the questions that were on the top of my mind. How does exclusion in education or society contribute to long-term inequity? What is the American dream to you? And then, is current success built on Black oppression? Why would we say that? Or why would we argue against this? And lastly, can personal success, education, wealth ever truly shield individuals from systemic racism? And I'll pretty much end all this note. This is my call to action. What can we do to make things better? Well, first thing is we must challenge exclusion. We must be aware of who is missing from spaces and who's not being represented in conversations. We must advocate for equity in education. We need to support educational policies that reduce tracking, as Oakes mentioned, and racial disparities in discipline. We need to engage in difficult conversations and make sure that those conversations take place rather than ignoring them, rather than chalking them up to political issues and things that we don't want to talk about. However uncomfortable we may feel, these conversations need to take place before we can have any type of progress in this regard. And lastly, we need to support marginalized voices. We need to give them voices, especially if their voices are being suppressed, especially if they don't have a voice. We can't speak for them. That's not possible because their true experience can only be conveyed by they themselves, as Ta-Nehisi Coates does a great job in communicating the type of life that he went through, the type of experiences that he went through. He communicated his emotions so eloquently. We need to give other people, also a chance to go ahead and voice their concerns and their experiences. Only then will we truly understand what they face. And these are just some of the references that I have I highlighted or used during this presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation, and I look forward to working with everyone to create more inclusive, more fair, more equitable opportunities for everyone.